Kentucky Basketball, a Bluegrass Legacy. The Prologue. Where hoops became a religion. Basketball in Kentucky is not just a sport. It's not even just tradition. It's breath and ritual. In towns where tobacco barns lean into the wind and church bells mark the hours, you can find makeshift hoops nailed to barn doors, gravel driveways beaten smooth by the rhythm of bouncing balls. In Lexington, Louisville, Hazard, and Pikeville, children learn to dribble before they learn to drive. It's a state where the rhythm of the year is not only planting and harvest, not only football in the fall, it is March and the blue roar that echoes from Rupp Arena to every small-town diner, barbershop, and living room. And at the heart of this culture lies the University of Kentucky, the Wildcats, the blue and white, the standard-bearers of a state's obsession. Chapter 1. The Dawn of a Program, 1903 to 1930s. Basketball in Kentucky started humbly, almost like a seed planted in uncertain soil. The University of Kentucky, then known as State College, fielded its first men's basketball team in 1903. There was no Rupp Arena, no national spotlight, not even much fanfare. Just a group of young men in wool uniforms playing a new sport in a small campus gym. The court was rough, the rules were still being figured out, and the sport itself was only a decade old. The team's first game ended in defeat, a 26-6 loss to Georgetown College. Losses piled up in those early years, and coaches came and went. Basketball was still a curiosity, not a religion, but the idea of Kentucky basketball had been born. In the 1910s and 1920s, the game began to take root. Kentucky's teams grew steadier, and so did the interest of students and fans. The first true star of Kentucky basketball arrived in Basil Hayden, a forward who captained the 1921 team and became the program's first All-American. Hayden's leadership hinted at what basketball could mean in Lexington. By the mid-1920s, the Wildcats began to find their stride. Clarence Applegran, a one-year head coach, led Kentucky to its first Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Association championship in 1921, and George Bookheit, another early coach, helped stabilize the program. But it was the 1930s when things truly began to shift. In 1930, the university hired a relatively unknown young coach from Kansas named Adolph Rupp. He was just 29 years old, carrying with him not only a sharp basketball mind, but also the confidence of someone who had studied the game where it had been born. Rupp walked into the Lexington gym and saw potential, not just in the players, but in the program itself. At the time, Kentucky wasn't yet a basketball state. Football carried weight. Horse racing was the pride of the Bluegrass. But Rupp would soon change that. He believed the game of basketball could capture the state's imagination because it was simple, fast, and accessible. All you needed was a ball, a hoop, and the will to play. By the end of the 1930s, Rupp's Wildcats were no longer an afterthought. They were contenders. His teams won conference titles, beat rivals, and made Kentucky a program to take seriously. What had started as a small experiment in 1903 had, by the 1930s, grown into something alive, something vibrant, something ready to explode into national prominence. The dawn had passed. The sun was rising on Kentucky basketball. Chapter 2. The Rupp Era and the Rise of a Dynasty, 1930s to 1972. When Adolph Rupp took over in 1930, the University of Kentucky was just another small program in a sport still finding its national identity. By the time he retired in 1972, Kentucky was the standard by which every other college basketball team was measured. Rupp was called many things: the Baron of the Bluegrass, the man in the brown suit, the architect of a dynasty. He was sharp-tongued, demanding, and unrelenting in his pursuit of perfection. He coached with the authority of a general and the precision of an engineer. For 4 decades, Kentucky basketball was Rupp basketball. The first taste of glory. In his very first season, Rupp's team went 15-3. Winning became expected, not hoped for. Through the 1930s and into the 1940s, Kentucky rose to prominence, dominating the SEC and carving out a national reputation. Then came 1948. The Fabulous Five, Alex Groza, Ralph Beard, Wallace Jones, Cliff Barker, and Kenny Rollins, stormed through the NCAA tournament to claim Kentucky's first national championship. That summer, representing the United States, they won Olympic gold in London. Kentucky basketball was no longer just regional pride. It was world class. The Wildcats repeated as national champions in 1949, cementing themselves as a dynasty. In just 2 decades, Rupp had built Kentucky into a basketball empire. The scandal of 1951. But with greatness came shadows. In 1951, the program was rocked by a national point-shaving scandal that involved several Kentucky players. Groza, Beard, and Dale Barnstable admitted to taking bribes to manipulate scores while playing professionally. Though the corruption never touched Kentucky games directly, the scandal forced the Wildcats to cancel the entire 1952 to 1953 season. It was a black eye on a program that prided itself on dominance. For some schools, a scandal like that would have been a death sentence. For Kentucky, it was only a pause. The Fiddlin' Five and the Roadback Kentucky returned stronger than ever. In 1958, the Fiddlin' Five captured another NCAA title. They weren't the most talented team Rupp ever coached, but they were scrappy, tough, and relentless, traits that became trademarks of the Kentucky program. By this time, Rupp had already become a legend in the state. His voice was unmistakable, his stare intimidating, his reputation unmatched. To play for Kentucky was to play for Rupp, and to play for Rupp was to step into a crucible. The integration and controversy. Yet Rupp's legacy was complicated. For most of his career, he resisted integrating his roster. Whether from personal prejudice, political pressure, or fear of backlash, Kentucky remained an all-white team, while programs across the country began recruiting black athletes. The moment of reckoning came in 1966, when Rupp's all-white Wildcats faced Don Haskins' all-black starting lineup from Texas Western in the NCAA championship game. Texas Western won 72-65 in what became one of the most significant games in sports history. It shattered the myth that black players couldn't lead teams to glory and forced programs like Kentucky to change. Rupp finally signed his first black player, Tom Paine, in 1969, but the damage to his reputation was done. Some branded him a racist. Others argued he was simply a man of his time. The truth likely lives in between, but the controversy remains part of his story. The Baron's legacy. By the time Rupp retired in 1972, his numbers were staggering. 41 seasons at Kentucky, 876 career wins, an NCAA record at the time. 4 national championships, 1948, 1949, 1951, 1958. 27 SEC titles. He turned Kentucky into the winningest program in college basketball history. He created an expectation that Kentucky would compete for championships every single year, but perhaps his greatest legacy was cultural. Rupp made basketball the heartbeat of Kentucky. He elevated the game from pastime to religion, and he laid the foundation for every coach who would follow. When the Baron stepped aside, he left behind more than just banners. He left behind a program that was no longer just a team. It was an identity for an entire state. The Rupp era was over. The dynasty had been built. The challenge for Kentucky now was clear. How do you follow a legend? Chapter 3. Joe B. Hall and the Bridge Between Eras, 1972 to 1985. Taking over from Adolph Rupp in 1972 was like stepping into a cathedral built by someone else and being told to preach louder. Rupp had become larger than life, a monument as much as a man, and Joe B. Hall, a former Kentucky player and longtime assistant, was asked to fill the space he left behind. Many doubted he could. Some even assumed he would fail. But Hall wasn't intimidated. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't a showman. He was steady, thoughtful, and deeply loyal to the program. And while he never sought to overshadow Rupp, he built a legacy of his own. one rooted in transition, resilience, and ultimately, triumph. A rocky beginning, Hall's first seasons were turbulent. Fans, still loyal to Rupp, were restless. The team posted winning records, but without the consistency of the Rupp dynasty, some questioned whether Hall was the right man for the job. Kentucky basketball was a pressure cooker, and Hall felt the heat, but he stuck to his vision, blending Kentucky tradition with a willingness to adapt. He broadened recruiting, bringing in black athletes more regularly, and expanding Kentucky's reach beyond the South. Hall didn't just inherit Rupp's program, he modernized it. The 1975 runner-up. The first real sign that Hall could carry Kentucky forward came in 1975, when the Wildcats returned to the NCAA championship game. That team, featuring Kevin Greavy and Jimmy Dan Connor, fell to UCLA in John Wooden's final game as coach. It was a loss, but an important one. Kentucky was back on the national stage, proving Hall could keep the program elite. The 1978 champions then came 1978. Hall's team, led by Jack Goose Givens, Kyle Macy, and Rick Roby, became legends in Kentucky lore. In the championship game against Duke, Givens delivered one of the greatest performances in NCAA history, scoring 41 points. The Wildcats won 94-88, giving Kentucky its fifth national championship. For Hall, it was vindication. He had taken the weight of Rupp's shadow and turned it into his own shining moment. No longer was he just the man who replaced the Baron. He was the man who brought Kentucky back to the top. A program in transition. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, Hall's Wildcats remained contenders. He recruited stars like Sam Bowie, Kenny Walker, and Melvin Turpin, continuing Kentucky's tradition of producing talent that could dominate at the college level and beyond. The 1984 team, nicknamed the Twin Towers for its front court of Bowie and Turpin, was stacked with NBA-level talent. They reached the Final Four, but fell short in a shocking upset to Georgetown, led by Patrick Ewing. It was a bitter loss, but a reminder of how unforgiving March Madness could be. To the end of the Hall era. By 1985, after 13 seasons, Hall stepped down. His record was impressive: 297 wins, 3 Final Fours, 1 national championship, 1978. He proved that Kentucky basketball wasn't just about Rupp. It was about a program built to last. Hall had walked the fine line between tradition and change, carrying the program from one era into the next. The legacy Joe B. Hall was never the showman Rupp had been, nor the revolutionary Rick Pitino would become, but he was the steady hand in a time of uncertainty, the bridge between the old Kentucky and the new. In the years since, Kentucky fans have come to appreciate Hall more and more. He was one of their own, a Kentucky man who devoted his life to the Wildcats. His championship in 1978 stands as proof that even under the heaviest shadow, greatness can still shine through. Kentucky had survived the transition from Rupp to Hall, but the next act would test the program's resilience once again. The mid-1980s brought turbulence, scandal, and the threat of collapse, before another revival would lift the Cats back to the very top. Chapter 4. Eddie Sutton and the Turbulent Years, 1985 to 1989. After Joe B. Hall stepped down in 1985, Kentucky faced another crossroads. The Wildcats needed a coach who could keep them among the nation's elite, and they turned to Eddie Sutton, a proven winner from Arkansas. On paper, it looked like a perfect fit. Sutton brought experience, a disciplined style, and a history of success. But the Sutton years would be remembered less for triumph on the court and more for controversy off of it. In just 4 seasons, Kentucky basketball would go from championship contender to a program brought to its knees. Promising start Sutton's arrival came with optimism. In his very first season, 1985 to 86, the Wildcats went 32-4, won the SEC, and reached the Final Four. Led by stars like Kenny Walker, Roger Harden, and freshman Rex Chapman, Kentucky looked poised to reclaim its place at the top of college basketball. But what began with promise soon unraveled. Rex Chapman and the pressure cooker. Rex Chapman, a sharpshooting guard from Owensboro, was the state's golden boy, the kind of player Kentucky fans dreamed about. He electrified Rupp Arena and carried the program's hopes. But even with Chapman's brilliance, Sutton's later teams struggled with inconsistency, chemistry issues, and rising tension inside the program. The pressure in Lexington was relentless. Sutton clashed with boosters, players, and media. Every loss was magnified, every rumor amplified. And then the rumors turned real. The Emory scandal. The breaking point came in 1988 to 1989, when the program was engulfed in scandal. An overnight package shipped by Emory Air Freight burst open during transit, revealing $1,000 in cash. The package had been sent by Kentucky assistant coach Dwayne Casey to the father of a recruit, Chris Mills. The NCAA launched an investigation. While Casey denied wrongdoing and later won a defamation lawsuit, the damage was done. Allegations of cash payments, academic fraud, and other violations swirled around the program. Kentucky basketball, once the proud standard of college hoops, was suddenly a national embarrassment. Collapse and resignation on the court, the Wildcats collapsed in Sutton's final season. The 1988 to 1989 team finished 13-19, Kentucky's first losing season since 1927. For a program that measured success in banners, it was unthinkable. Facing NCAA sanctions, media firestorms, and fan outrage, Sutton resigned in 1989. His overall record at Kentucky wasn't terrible, 88-39 in 4 seasons, but the off-court scandals and the losing record left deep scars. The fallout. In 1989, the NCAA hammered Kentucky with penalties, 2 years of probation, post-season ban for 1989-90, severe scholarship reductions, television ban for 1 season. For Big Blue Nation, it was devastation. The once proud program had fallen into disgrace, its reputation stained. Many wondered if Kentucky could ever recover. Legacy of the Sutton years. The Sutton era is remembered as Kentucky's lowest point in the modern era, a cautionary tale of how quickly success can crumble under the weight of scandal. But in hindsight, the Sutton years also set the stage for one of the greatest revivals in sports history. Because out of the ashes of NCAA, probation would come a fiery resurrection, led by a coach with a New York accent, a fast-paced system, and a vision that would return Kentucky to glory. Kentucky basketball had hit rock bottom, but the next chapter would be one of redemption, passion, and some of the most unforgettable teams the Bluegrass had ever seen. Chapter 5. Rick Pitino and the Revival, 1989 to 1997. In 1989, Kentucky basketball was broken. Scandal, probation, and humiliation had left the program staggering. The once proud Wildcats were banned from television, banned from the postseason, and stripped of scholarships. For many, the damage seemed permanent. Enter Rick Pitino. Pitino was a brash New Yorker with slicked-back hair, sharp suits, and a style of basketball that could make an arena explode. He had just taken the New York Knicks to the NBA playoffs, but he shocked the basketball world by leaving Madison Square Garden to take over a scandal-ridden Kentucky program. To outsiders, it looked like career suicide. To Kentucky, it was salvation. Running to redemption. From day one, Pitino made it clear Kentucky basketball was going to run. His teams pressed full court, fired three-pointers with abandon, and played at a breakneck speed that overwhelmed opponents. The early rosters were thin, probation had gutted Kentucky's depth. But Pitino squeezed every ounce out of the players he had. In 1990, his undermanned Wildcats still managed a winning season. By 1991-92, Kentucky was back in the national spotlight, fueled by a core group of seniors who would become legends, the Unforgettables. And the Unforgettables and the Lettner game, Richie Farmer. Darren Feldhaus, John Pelfrey, Sean Woods. 4 Kentucky boys who stayed when the program was at its lowest, refusing to abandon the Wildcats during probation. They became the embodiment of Kentucky pride, gritty, loyal, and unrelenting. Their story reached its peak in the 1992 NCAA tournament, when Kentucky faced Duke in the Elite Eight. It became one of the most famous games in basketball history. With seconds left in overtime, Sean Woods hit a floater to put Kentucky ahead. It looked like a miracle was about to happen. Kentucky, from the ashes of probation, was going to the Final Four. Then came Christian Lettner. Duke inbounded the ball the length of the court. Lettner caught it, turned, and hit the shot that broke Kentucky hearts. Duke 104, Kentucky 103. It was agony, but also vindication. Kentucky basketball was back. The program had been resurrected, and the nation saw it live. The rise of the untouchables. Pitino didn't stop there. His recruiting classes brought in stars like Jamal Mashburn, Tony Delk, Antoine Walker, and Ron Mercer. Kentucky teams of the mid-90s became juggernauts, deep, fast, and ruthless. The pinnacle came in 1996 with the team nicknamed the Untouchables. Led by Delk, Walker, Mercer, Walter McCarty, and Derek Anderson, Kentucky rolled through opponents with a ferocity rarely seen in college basketball. They finished 34-2 and won the national championship, Pitino's crowning achievement in Lexington. Many consider the 1996 Wildcats one of the greatest college basketball teams of all time. The following year, Kentucky returned to the title game but fell short to Arizona in overtime. Still, the back-to-back runs proved Kentucky was not just back. They were dominant. The departure. In 1997, Pitino made a decision that stunned Big Blue Nation. He left Kentucky to become head coach of the Boston Celtics. His record in Lexington was astounding. 219-50 overall. 6 NCAA tournament appearances, 2 Final Fours, 1 national championship, 1996. But Pitino's true legacy wasn't just in the wins. It was in restoring Kentucky's pride, reviving the program from disgrace, and creating a style of play that electrified fans and terrified opponents. Legacy Pitino left behind a program roaring with momentum. He gave Kentucky not just a team, but an identity again, fast, fearless, and unforgettable. For a fan base that had tasted humiliation just a decade earlier, Pitino's run was proof of resilience. Kentucky had been brought to its knees only to rise higher than ever, and when he walked away, the Wildcats didn't miss a beat. His successor, Tubby Smith, would take Pitino's players and write his own chapter of glory. Kentucky basketball was alive, powerful, and dangerous once again. The next coach would inherit a program at the peak of its strength. Chapter 6. Tubby Smith and the 1998 Championship, 1997-2007. When Rick Pitino left for the NBA in 1997, Kentucky basketball was at the height of its power. The program had just played in back-to-back national championship games, winning one and nearly winning another. The Wildcats were loaded with talent, the fan base was ravenous, and expectations were nothing short of banners or bust. Into this fire stepped Orlando Tubby Smith. Calm, measured, and steady, Smith was the perfect contrast to Pitino's high-octane persona. Where Pitino was fiery, Tubby was cool. Where Pitino barked, Tubby encouraged. Yet behind the quiet demeanor was a fierce competitor and a brilliant defensive coach. The 1998 comeback cat Smith inherited a roster stacked with Pitino's recruits. Players like Jeff Shepard, Scott Padgett, Nazr Muhammad, and Wayne Turner. But Tubby would put his own stamp on them. That season, Kentucky didn't always look like a juggernaut. They stumbled at times, but once the NCAA tournament began, they found another gear. Nicknamed the Comeback Cats, the 1998 team became famous for rallying from behind. In the Elite Eight against Duke, Kentucky trailed by 17 points in the second half. Shepard and Padgett led a furious comeback to stun the Blue Devils. In the Final Four against Stanford, Kentucky clawed back from another deficit to win in overtime. In the national championship against Utah, the Wildcats once again fell behind by as many as 10 in the second half before storming back to win 78-69. It was Kentucky's 7th national championship, and Tubby Smith became the first black head coach at Kentucky to win it all. For Big Blue Nation, it was a triumphant continuation of Pitino's foundation. Consistency without the banners. The 1998 championship cemented Tubby as a Kentucky legend. Over the next 9 seasons, his Wildcats were consistently strong. 5 SEC regular season titles, 5 SEC tournament titles, 4 Elite 8 appearances, never missed the NCAA tournament. Tubby's teams were disciplined and defensive-minded. They might not have had Pitino's flash, but they won, year after year. The high point after 1998 came in 2003, when Kentucky went 16-0 in SEC play, won the conference tournament, and entered the NCAA tournament as the overall number 1 seed. That team, led by Keith Bogans, was poised to cut down the nets again. But an ankle injury to Bogans crippled the Cats, and they fell to Marquette in the Elite 8, behind a young guard named Dwyane Wade. The criticism of Tubby Ball. Despite his success, Tubby often faced criticism from Kentucky's passionate fan base. His slower-paced style, dubbed Tubby Ball, frustrated some who longed for the fireworks of the Pitino years. Fans wanted more banners, and after 1998, Kentucky never returned to the Final Four under Tubby. Recruiting struggles added fuel to the criticism. Kentucky missed out on several top prospects, and though Tubby developed his players well, his rosters sometimes lacked the star power of past eras. By the mid-2000s, the grumbling grew louder. To some fans, consistent winning wasn't enough. They demanded championships. The end of an era. In 2007, after 10 seasons, Tubby Smith resigned from Kentucky and accepted the head coaching job at Minnesota. His record at UK was outstanding, 263-83 overall. 1 national championship, 1998. 5 SEC titles. But his departure reflected the relentless pressure of coaching at Kentucky. For many programs, Tubby's decade would have been legendary. In Lexington, it was viewed as not enough. Legacy. Tubby Smith left behind a complicated but important legacy. He brought Kentucky a national title in his very first season, kept the program elite for a decade, and did so with integrity, dignity, and consistency. Yet he also revealed the paradox of Kentucky basketball. Excellence is expected, and even great isn't always good enough. The Cats now faced another transition. Who would carry the program into the next era? First came Billy Gillispie, a storm of chaos, before the arrival of a coach who would redefine Kentucky basketball for the 21st century, John Calipari. Chapter 7. The Gillispie Interlude, 2007-2009. When Tubby Smith resigned in 2007, Kentucky needed a new leader to carry the torch. The program turned to Billy Gillispie, a hard-nosed Texas coach who had earned a reputation for rebuilding programs at UTEP and Texas A&M. On paper, it seemed like a bold, fresh choice, a relentless recruiter and fiery motivator. But in practice, the Gillispie era was short, chaotic, and unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. The rough-fit Gillispie never really fit in Lexington. He was brilliant in the gym, obsessed with practice, detail, and conditioning, but he struggled with the culture of Kentucky basketball. Coaching the Wildcats is more than just basketball. It's a political and public role, with media demands, fan expectations, and community engagement. Gillispie resisted that spotlight, often clashing with reporters, fans, and even his own administration. His methods were equally harsh on players. Practices were grueling, his communication inconsistent. Some players thrived under the intensity, but others buckled. Stories of fractured relationships and questionable decisions began to circulate. On the court, Gillispie's first season, 2007-2008, wasn't a disaster. Kentucky went 18-13, made the NCAA tournament, and showed flashes of toughness, but by his second season, cracks were obvious. The 2008-9 Wildcats finished 22-14, missing the NCAA tournament for the first time since 1991. For Kentucky fans, it was unthinkable. The program's identity is March, and missing the big dance was sacrilege. The end. By spring 2009, the relationship between Gillispie and Kentucky's athletic department had collapsed. He was dismissed after just 2 seasons, his record at Kentucky a modest 40-27. The Gillispie years were short, but they left scars. Kentucky fans were restless, desperate for stability and success. The program needed more than just a coach. It needed a visionary, a recruiter, a leader who could handle the pressure of Rupp Arena and the glare of the national spotlight. Legacy. The Gillispie era is remembered as a misstep, a reminder of just how high the stakes are in Lexington. At most schools, 2 years of decent but uninspired basketball would be brushed aside. At Kentucky, it was enough to spark a crisis. But out of crisis came opportunity, because in 2009, Kentucky hired a man whose name would become synonymous with the modern Wildcats, John Calipari. Chapter 8. John Calipari and the One-and-Done Era, 2009 to present. When John Calipari was introduced as Kentucky's new head coach in 2009, the program was desperate for a reset. The Billy Gillispie experiment had ended in disaster, and the Big Blue Nation demanded not just a winner, but a savior. Calipari walked into Lexington with swagger. A proven recruiter, a motivator, and a salesman, he promised to restore Kentucky's place atop college basketball. He delivered instantly, both in wins and in redefining what it meant to be a Wildcat. The recruiting machine Calipari embraced what others feared, the rise of the one-and-done era, where elite high school players played 1 mandatory year in college before bolting for the NBA. While traditionalists balked, Calipari turned it into a strategy. He built his program around recruiting the best players in the country: John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Anthony Davis, Karl Anthony Towns, Devin Booker, Jamal Murray, De'Aaron Fox, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The list is endless. For a decade, Lexington became the NBA's unofficial farm system. Calipari told recruits, "Kentucky isn't for everyone, but it's for players who want to be the best." The message worked. Kentucky became a revolving door of 5-star talent, each class hyped bigger than the last. The 2010 Revival Cal's very first team, led by John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, and Eric Bledsoe, reignited the fire. Rupp Arena roared like it hadn't in years. The Wildcats won 35 games, returned to the Elite Eight, and brought swagger back to the program. Kentucky basketball was officially back on top. The 2012 National Championship. The pinnacle of the Calipari era came in 2012. That season's team, anchored by Anthony Davis, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Terrence Jones, Doran Lamb, and Marquis Teague, was nearly unstoppable. Davis, a defensive force with the wingspan of a condor, dominated college basketball like few ever had. The Wildcats went 38-2 and stormed through the NCAA tournament, defeating Kansas in the national championship game. It was Kentucky's 8th national championship and Calipari's crowning moment. The unfinished business of 2015. As dominant as 2012 was, the 2014-15 team might be the most famous of the Calipari era, with Karl Anthony Towns, Devin Booker, the Harrison twins, Willie Cauley-Stein, and Trey Lyles. The Wildcats started the season 38-0. They demolished opponents, winning games by 30, 40, even 50 points. Pundits debated whether they were the greatest college team ever assembled. But in the Final Four, Wisconsin stunned Kentucky, ending the undefeated dream. The Wildcats finished 38-1. No banner, but the season remains one of the most unforgettable in program history. Cal's roller coaster. The Calipari years have been defined by extremes. 2010, 2011, 2012, 2014, 2015, 2017. multiple Final Fours, one national title, and constant NBA draft headlines. 2013, 2016, 2018, 2020, 2021, shocking losses, upsets, and frustrations that tested the patience of Big Blue Nation. The 2013 NIT first-round loss to Robert Morris remains a sore wound. The 2021 season, wrecked by the COVID pandemic and roster struggles, ended with a 9-16 record, the program's worst in nearly a century. Still, every time critics count him out, Calipari reloads with another elite class, keeping Kentucky in the national conversation. NBA pipeline. Perhaps Calipari's most undeniable achievement is the sheer number of Wildcats who became NBA stars. Under his watch, Kentucky sent dozens of players to the league, many becoming all-stars and champions. Anthony Davis, NBA champion, 10 times All-Star. Devin Booker, NBA Finals, All-NBA. Karl Anthony Towns, 3 times All-Star. Jamal Murray, NBA champion, playoff legend. De'Aaron Fox, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Bam Adebayo, the list goes on. The pipeline cemented Kentucky as the destination for future pros. The Calipari legacy, 2009 to 2024. John Calipari's Kentucky tenure was a study in extremes, spectacular highs, painful lows, and constant national relevance. One national championship, 2012, 4 Final Fours, 6 SEC tournament titles. An unprecedented NBA pipeline. To some in Big Blue Nation, one banner felt light given the avalanche of 5-star talent. To others, Calipari rewired modern recruiting, kept Kentucky on center stage, and sent a generation of Wildcats to the league. After Lexington in 2024, Calipari departed Kentucky to take the Arkansas job, shifting SEC gravity and ending a 15-year run that defined an era. His polarizing blueprint, annual roster turnover, NBA first messaging, and the one-and-done carousel leaves behind a complicated inheritance, elite expectations without guaranteed continuity. Where Kentucky stands now, post-Calipari, Kentucky turns the page to a new voice and a new build. The charge is familiar but formidable. Preserve the program's national profile, rekindle March dominance, and blend modern player movement, NIL, portal, pro paths, with the program's bedrock. Defense, unselfish play, and a fan base that measures seasons in nets cut. However the styles evolve in Lexington and Fayetteville, one truth doesn't budge. Calipari's years kept Kentucky loud, relevant, and unavoidable, and they set the stage for a fresh chapter that will be judged by the oldest metric in the Bluegrass, banners. Chapter 9. Legacy and Impact of Kentucky Basketball. More than a century has passed since Kentucky first laced up in 1903. From dusty gymnasiums to packed arenas, from wool uniforms to Nike gear, the Wildcats' journey has been more than just basketball. It's been the heartbeat of a state, the pride of generations, and a tradition that binds people together across miles and decades. A tradition of excellence. Kentucky basketball is synonymous with winning. 8 national championships, the second most in NCAA history. Dozens of Final Fours. Over 2,300 victories, keeping the Wildcats near the very top of the all-time wins list. From Adolph Rupp's early dynasties, to Joby Hall's bridge, to Pitino's revival, Tubby's steadiness, and Calipari's one-and-done revolution, the program has set the standard for excellence across generations. But Kentucky's legacy isn't only about banners, it's about the moments etched into memory. Goose Given's 41 points in 1978, the Unforgettables battling Duke in 1992, Anthony Davis swatting everything in sight in 2012, the undefeated dream of 2015. Every era has its heroes, every team its stories. Together, they form a tapestry of tradition unmatched in college sports. The power of the Big Blue Nation. What makes Kentucky basketball truly unique is its fan base. The Big Blue Nation isn't just a nickname, it's a movement. From Pikeville to Paducah, from rural hollers to Lexington's Rupp Arena, fans live and breathe every dribble. Rupp Arena itself is a cathedral, one of the loudest and most intimidating venues in sports. But the reach goes far beyond Lexington. Wherever Kentucky plays, Atlanta, Nashville, Indianapolis, even far-flung NCAA sites, you'll see seas of blue. Other fan bases travel. Kentucky invades. The program has become woven into the state's identity. In Kentucky, you don't just watch basketball, you inherit it, the way you inherit family recipes or a last name. Children grow up shooting hoops in driveways, imagining themselves in Wildcat blue. For many, wearing Kentucky across the chest is the dream of a lifetime. Icons and Influence Kentucky has produced legends whose influence ripples far beyond Lexington. Dan Issel, one of the greatest scorers in NCAA history. Pat Riley, who went from Kentucky guard to legendary NBA coach and executive. Jamal Mashburn, Tony Delk, Antoine Walker, heroes of the 90s. Anthony Davis, Devin Booker, Jamal Murray, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, modern stars lighting up the NBA. No other program has sent so much talent to the next level while maintaining such consistent dominance in college basketball. The weight of expectation Kentucky basketball is both a blessing and a burden. The same passion that fuels Big Blue Nation can turn critical in an instant. Coaches are judged not by wins alone but by championships. Players are celebrated as heroes one game, critiqued as disappointments the next. It is the price of greatness, but it is also what makes Kentucky basketball singular. Few programs carry such relentless expectation. Fewer still live up to it, decade after decade. The legacy, still being written. As Kentucky pushes deeper into the 21st century, the story is far from over. The sport is evolving. Name, image, and likeness deals, transfer portals, shifting NCAA rules, but Kentucky remains at the center of it all. The Wildcats' legacy isn't just about what they've achieved, it's about what they represent: resilience, pride, and the belief that every season could end with a net being cut down. From Rupp's first championship to Calipari's NBA pipelines, from heartbreaks to triumphs, Kentucky basketball has been a story of tradition meeting change, of history colliding with the future. Epilogue: more than a game. In the end, Kentucky basketball is more than the sum of wins and losses. It is the unifying thread of a state, the shared language of its people, and a beacon of excellence that stretches beyond the Bluegrass. Every March, when the ball is tipped and the brackets are filled, millions look to see what Kentucky will do. Because no matter the roster, no matter the opponent, Kentucky carries the weight of history, the roar of Big Blue Nation, and the legacy of being college basketball's greatest stage. This is Kentucky basketball, a dynasty, a culture, a legend still unfolding.